What if I told you America's most powerful gangster was never arrested for the hundreds of murders linked to his name? What if the most feared criminal in U.S. history was finally destroyed, not by bullets, but by tax papers? How did a poor immigrant boy from Brooklyn become the king of Chicago's underworld? Who protected Al Capone? And who secretly wanted him dead? And what really happened inside his mind when the empire finally collapsed? Tonight, you're about to enter the true story of Alphonse Gabriel Capone, a story of blood, power, betrayal, and an ending nobody expected. This is not a movie. This really happened. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, to poor Italian immigrant parents. He wasn't born a monster. He was born into overcrowded streets, violent neighborhoods, and a world where survival meant fighting. Capone dropped out of school at 14 after hitting a teacher. The classroom ended. The streets began. He joined small gangs, then bigger ones, until he was recruited by a powerful crime boss, Johnny Torrio. Capone became an enforcer. His job was simple: intimidate, beat, kill. At 18, his face was slashed in a bar fight while insulting a woman. 3 deep cuts. That scar gave him the name the world would fear: Scarface. In 1919, Torrio called him to Chicago, and Chicago was about to explode, because America had just entered Prohibition. No alcohol, no bars, no liquor, but where law ends, crime begins. And Al Capone saw his opportunity. Prohibition turned Chicago into a gold mine. Illegal alcohol meant illegal money, and illegal money meant war. Capone built secret breweries, smuggling routes, and underground bars called speakeasies. Within a few years, his organization was making over $100 million a year. He bribed police. He controlled judges. He owned politicians. If someone refused, they disappeared. Capone didn't just run alcohol. He controlled gambling, prostitution, protection rackets, and contract killings. Entire neighborhoods belonged to him. But the real power shift happened in 1925, when Johnny Torrio was nearly assassinated. Torrio stepped down and handed Chicago to Al Capone. At just 26 years old, Al Capone became the most powerful crime boss in America. But power creates enemies, and enemies create blood. By the late 1920s, Chicago was a battlefield. Capone versus rival gangs. Most dangerous of all, George "Bugs" Moran. On February 14, 1929, 7 men from Moran's gang were lined up inside a garage. They thought it was a police raid. 2 men in police uniforms ordered them to face the wall. Seconds later, machine guns roared. When the smoke cleared, 7 bodies were on the floor, some still breathing, then shot again. The St. Valentine's Day massacre shocked America. Newspapers exploded. Children saw the photos. Politicians panicked. Everyone knew who was behind it, but no one could prove it. Witnesses vanished. Police were bought. Evidence disappeared. Al Capone smiled in public, but privately, the government had decided they couldn't stop him with guns, so they would destroy him with numbers. The U.S. government created a special task force. 1 man focused only on Capone's money. His name, Elliot Ness. Ness attacked the breweries, smashed the supply lines, closed the speakeasies. At the same time, federal agents quietly studied Capone's income, and they found something shocking. The most powerful criminal in America had never paid taxes. In 1931, Al Capone was arrested, not for murder, not for massacre, but for tax evasion. He was found guilty, sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. First Atlanta, then Alcatraz. America's most feared gangster, was now locked in a concrete cage. But prison didn't just trap his body. It destroyed his mind. Untreated syphilis slowly ate his brain. By the time he was released in 1939, Al Capone could barely recognize people. He spent his final years confused, weak, and broken. On January 25, 1947, Alphonse Gabriel Capone died. Not in a shootout, not in power, but quietly, in a bed. The king of crime ended as a shadow. How did a poor boy from Brooklyn rise to become the most feared man in America, and yet fall without a single bullet touching him? Early life in Brooklyn. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrants Gabriel and Teresa Capone. Life was cramped. Streets were crowded. Jobs were scarce. Violence was everywhere. Young Al watched his father struggle to provide. He watched his brothers fight on the streets. And he quickly learned, only the strong survive. At school, Al struggled with reading and writing. But he excelled in fighting. By age 14, after a confrontation with a teacher, he dropped out. The streets became his classroom. First gang experience. Capone started with small-time gangs. 5 Points Gang, learning how to pickpocket, intimidate, and steal. He wasn't the biggest or strongest, but he had a killer instinct, and a face people wouldn't forget. The scar. During a fight over a woman at a Brooklyn bar, Al was slashed across the left cheek. 3 deep cuts. Painful, permanent. From that day, the streets called him Scarface. Meeting Johnny Torrio. By 1919, Capone had caught the attention of Johnny Torrio, a top Chicago gangster. Torrio saw potential. Ruthless, loyal, fearless. He offered Al a job in Chicago. First, Capone thought, why Chicago? The answer, prohibition. Alcohol was banned in America, but the demand was skyrocketing. Where law ends, money begins, and that money needed muscle. Journey to Chicago. 20, Al moved to Chicago. The city was a powder keg. Rival gangs fought for control. Capone quickly proved himself. Street fights, enforcement, intimidation. Capone's style was simple. Bribe when needed, threaten when necessary, kill if unavoidable. He gained respect and fear. Soon, Chicago would know him not as a boy from Brooklyn, but as Scarface Capone, the rising king of Rise to Power. 1925. Johnny Torrio had survived an assassination attempt and decided to retire. He handed the keys of Chicago's underworld to Al Capone. At just 26 years old, Capone became the most powerful gangster in America. But power wasn't just about money, it was about fear, loyalty, and control. Capone's empire wasn't built in a day. He controlled illegal alcohol distribution, bootlegging, gambling dens, prostitution rings, protection rackets. And if someone refused to cooperate, they disappeared. Building the alcohol empire, prohibition was a gold mine. Capone established secret breweries and smuggling routes. Trucks carrying whiskey moved at night. Police were bribed to look the other way. Speakeasies, illegal bars hidden in basements and back rooms, flourished. Capone's men collected protection money. Anyone who resisted faced a brutal warning. Money flowed in by the millions every year, and Al spent it lavishly. Cars, houses, jewelry. But his greatest currency was fear. Enemies and rival gangs. Chicago wasn't safe. Capone had rivals, the most notorious being George "Bugs" Moran. Moran controlled the north side and Capone the south. Territory disputes often turned deadly. Shootouts in streets, ambushes in alleys. Chicago's citizens lived in constant fear, unsure whether a bullet would hit them or the gangsters. Capone's genius. he never fought alone. His enforcers were loyal, ruthless, and invisible to the law. Public image versus reality. Al Capone was not just feared, he was smart. He hosted charity events, donated to hospitals, and appeared in newspapers as a friendly businessman. But behind the smile and tailored suits, he ordered killings and destroyed lives. He learned the most important lesson early: control the narrative, bribe the authorities, and keep the evidence hidden. Foreshadowing violence. Capone's empire was booming, but the seeds of his downfall were already planted. Enemies were everywhere. The public's anger was growing, and soon one event would shock the entire nation. February 14th, 1929. A massacre that would change Chicago forever. 7 men would die in cold blood, and the world would finally see the true face of Scarface. Are you ready to witness the St. Valentine's Day Massacre? Chicago's bloodbath. It was February 14th, 1929. Chicago was cold, silent, but tense. The North Side Gang, led by George "Bugs" Moran, was a thorn in Capone's side. Capone wanted them eliminated permanently. The plan was simple: lure Moran's men into a trap, make it look like a routine police raid. And on that morning, Capone's men were ready. The trap. 7 men walked into a Lincoln Park garage. They were told to line up against the wall by 2 men disguised as police officers. The gangsters didn't suspect anything, but in seconds, machine guns erupted. The sound echoed through the streets. Smoke filled the garage. 7 bodies fell. Some were still alive, until the killers made sure they weren't. Public shock. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre shocked the nation. Newspapers ran gruesome headlines. Americans stared at photographs of the blood-soaked garage, wondering, is this Chicago or a war zone? For Capone, it was another day of business. For Moran, it was total devastation. For the city, it was a terrifying warning. Scarface controlled everything. Capone's reaction. Al Capone didn't hide. He publicly laughed off the rumors, hosting charity events and appearing in newspapers. But behind closed doors, he knew the massacre had changed everything. The public feared him. The law was outraged, and the federal government started planning his downfall. Capone's empire was strong, but the first real cracks were forming, foreshadowing the fall. The massacre made one thing clear: no crime was too big, no life too small, no law could touch him. But every empire has a weak point, and the US government had found it. Al Capone's money. Cliffhanger. The most feared gangster in America would not fall by bullets, bombs, or rival gangs. He would fall to something far simpler and far more humiliating: the IRS. How does a man who could kill at will get arrested for taxes? The answer is coming in the final chapter. By 1930, Al Capone was sitting on top of the world. Chicago was his kingdom. The streets obeyed him. Politicians bowed. Police were either paid off or scared to act. But the law was patient, and it had found Capone's weakness: money. For all his power, Capone had never paid taxes on his immense income. The feds couldn't touch him for murders or massacres, but they could attack his finances. A special team, led by Elliot Ness, started the mission to bring down Scarface. Not with bullets, but with numbers. Ness and his untouchables raided breweries, speakeasies, and illegal warehouses. They confiscated whiskey and disrupted Capone's distribution lines. Capone laughed publicly, but privately he realized the walls were closing in. The tax evasion case. The federal agents dug into every transaction. Receipts, ledgers, bank accounts. Even Capone's lavish lifestyle couldn't hide the truth. He hadn't paid a single cent in taxes. In 1931, the government finally had the proof. Al Capone was arrested for tax evasion. The irony was brutal. A man who had orchestrated mass murders, ran the deadliest gangs in America, and ruled Chicago with an iron fist, would fall to the IRS. The trial was a spectacle. Newspapers covered every detail.